And now for the readings. They're really important readings, that's why I'm here with the podium. The first reading is from the I Ching. People without substance think that small acts of goodness are of no benefit, so they don't do them. And they also think that small deeds of evil will do no harm, so they don't keep from doing that. But the Tao Te Ching says, the tree that fills the arms grew from the tiniest sprout. The tower of 9 stories rose from a heap of earth, and the journey of 1,000 li began with a single step.
I'm reading from the book of 2 Peter, chapter 1. It's a short reading, so pay attention, everyone. For this very reason, make every effort to add to your faith goodness, and to goodness knowledge, and to knowledge self-control, and to self-control perseverance, and to perseverance godliness.
Years ago, when my husband Craig and I lived in an apartment, the hose that led to our washer started dripping a little. Just a tiny bit. Not enough to notice. But Craig finished his laundry one Wednesday evening, and the hose just sat in the washer, dripping just a little. Until by Saturday morning, the guy in the apartment below us came pounding on our door to find out why there was water leaking from his ceiling. And we tracked him. Sure enough, in those 2 days and a half, the washer had finally filled and overflowed, and there was a puddle of water on the floor by the washer that had been gradually seeping through to the apartment below. We mopped it up, of course, and we emptied the washer, but at first, we couldn't figure out how it had gotten filled to overflowing. I mean, the water wasn't turned on. The washer wasn't on. And then we discovered it, a little drip, and then another coming out of the hose. It wasn't much, just enough to cause a couple $100 worth of damage. But in those 2 days and a half, those little drops of water did as much damage as 10 gallons of water poured out at once would have done in 2.5 minutes. And that's the way I think it often is with evil in our lives. As the Buddhist Dhammapada puts it, do not think lightly of wrongdoing, saying in your heart, it won't come near to me. For just as a water pot is filled eventually by falling drops of water, so a fool will become full of evil, even if they gather it only a drop at a time. Now, I'm sure there are some people who, seem to suddenly go bad and make a dramatic change for the worse. But I think most of us do it rather gradually, a little drop here, a drop there, until, as the Dhammapada puts it, the water pot is eventually filled and the fools become full of evil, even though they only gather it a drop at a time. Probably a lot of you know that they did experiments with frogs. This is true, it's not a wife's tale, by the way, or husband's tale. If you have a bunch of frogs in water and you heat up the water very quickly, the frogs will jump out so they won't burn up or die. But if you heat the water only very gradually, they will not jump out, no matter how hot it gets. Because you see, they never notice the change, and they've evolved only to notice sudden dangers, not long-term ones. Human beings are smarter than frogs.
Sometimes.
When it comes to water. But not when it comes to ethics. If you heat up an ethical situation slowly by degrees, most of us won't get out of the hot water we're in. Now, most of of us don't go bad all at once. We start out small, and once we get used to the small stuff, we graduate to something a little bigger. Not very big, just a drop bigger than what we had gotten used to. To see, a good example to see this at work might be government intelligence operations. When a government wants to get someone to be a spy for them, they usually start small. First, they ask their mark to get information for them that they don't need. Something trivial, a bit of information that's not even classified and is probably available in a public library. So the recruit doesn't feel like they're betraying their country. And after the recruit gets used to little jobs like that, they ask them to get something a little more questionable, just slightly. So all of an intelligence agency's early work with a potential informer is merely an investment for the future. They don't need any of the information they're asking for at the beginning. They just pay this person to get it so that when the time comes to get something valuable, they will have paved the way. They understand human nature. You see, it is hard to get someone to do something totally against their values unless you gradually help them change their values. And the same is true in our ethical and spiritual lives. Most of us don't go bad all at once. Research actually shows that, they've done some research on lies. Research actually shows that once you get used to telling small lies, what we sometimes call white lies or fibs, it gets a little easier to start telling bigger ones. MRI brain scans done on subjects while lying show that the part of the brain that processes emotions becomes desensitized as the lies get older. So guilt begins to go away. This was shown by decreased blood supply and activity in the amygdala. Researchers at the University College of London's Affective Brain Lab put it this way: we get used to the lying, much like someone no longer noticing the smell of their perfume over time, and thus using more. And you can think of this as a slippery slope with what begins as small acts of dishonesty escalating to much larger ones. This is how allergy shots work, by the way. They take the thing or things, this is a good example, but a good thing. They take the thing that you're allergic to, or the things, and inject them into your skin, and your body reacts, gets sore or itchy, and then once it begins to tolerate it, they inject a little bit more. And each time the body reacts a little, but then it gets used to it, until eventually they're putting in fairly large amounts, and your body is getting over its allergy. I know I had allergy shots. Unfortunately, at the time, they didn't have it for dogs, for allergies to dogs, so that one stayed with me. Or consider drug and alcohol addiction. Most people don't start out as full-blown addicts. At first, they're social drinkers, or recreational drug users. Then maybe heavy drinkers or users. Then maybe kind of problem drinkers or users. And when do you pass that invisible line between I might have a problem with alcohol to I'm an alcoholic? Not everyone who's been there could say. They know it got worse, and that at some point they realized they had to stop. But just when it was that they went from social drinker to problem drinker, or from problem drinker to alcoholic, they would be hard-pressed to say. But that's the way most things are. Trees don't grow all of a sudden. People don't get old overnight. Children don't learn to talk and read in a few days. Even when it looks like they did, if you look carefully, you'll see that the seeds that were sown for it were there long before it sprouted. The same is true, I believe, with our moral sensitivity. We grow or regress step by step. That's what the word gradually came from, by the way. It comes from gradus, which is Latin for step, as in the steps of a stairway. And even the word graduate in English comes from the same Latin word, step. When you think about it, graduations are really gradual things too. Now I know when you graduate from high school or college or grad school, it may be a dramatic event, but a graduation is really an arbitrary marking of a whole series of steps or grades or degrees of knowledge. And that's another funny name, degree. When you graduate from graduate school, they give you a degree. A degree also means step, as when we say I got used to it by degrees. Degree is from the Latin de gradus, which is just de, meaning down, and gradus again, or step. De gradus, step down. The other English word we get from de gradus, by the way, besides degree, is degrade. And when you think about that word, you may think of something more large scale than the step-by-step process. But hardly anyone gets degraded all at once. Degradation is also a gradual thing. And even when someone looks like they've gone down all at once, chances are they started stepping down long before, and no one noticed it because the steps were so small. In the last century, the whole world witnessed the Holocaust, the murder of 6 million Jews from 1941 to 1945, plus members of other persecuted groups. And people have often asked, how could they have allowed this to happen? That is, how could the German people have let it go so far? How could the Allies let Hitler do what he did? And how come the Jews of Germany just refuse to board trains to concentration camps? And if they couldn't do that, why didn't they at least leave Germany before it all came to pass? There was time to leave. The answer to these questions, and to most questions about degradation, is contained in that word, gradus, steps. It all happened in steps. Sure, if the Jews in Germany had known their ultimate fate, they would probably have all tried to leave while they could still get visas. But they didn't know that. They couldn't have even guessed it. And when the Jews were first ordered into concentration camps, they didn't know they were going to be exterminated there. They just thought they were going to be gathered there, which was actually one step away from being gathered in city ghettos, which had already happened. Incidentally, our word ghetto, that idea goes back before Hitler's time. If you go to ever visit Venice in Italy, one of the islands is called Getto, because it had been made steel, and that's where all the Jews were forced to live. And that's why their houses have 2 or 3 stories, because they were more crowded. But anyway, our word Getto, because the J sound was not in the Hebrew word language, they made it Ghetto. Little known and less cared about that. In 1933, when Hitler came to power, 33,000 Jews left Germany just in that year alone. But it decreased after that, partly because most Jews thought it couldn't get any worse. It did get worse, but only gradually. First, Jews were expelled from the army and the civil service and the universities. And Jewish professionals, like doctors, were at first prohibited only from service to non-Jews. Then they were prohibited from serving anyone. Then all Jews were excluded from citizenship. And then they were told where they could live and where they could go, and were forced to wear the yellow star to identify that. But there was always a pattern to this. First, the Nazis would attack Jewish people in some way, and maybe attack again, and then they would pause. And they would wait to see what world opinion would be. And if it wasn't too strong against them, they'd go another step. If it was strongly negative, then they'd retreat. Or maybe they do the same thing, but more secretly. But they always worked in steps. Actually, they looked to the United States for how to treat an undesired minority. That's where they got some of their ideas. If they can do that in America, we can do it here. Of course, in America, it was the African Americans. So if you ever wonder how the Nazis could have just taken millions of people away to kill them, you must remember they started out rather differently. The first step was to forcibly sterilize all mentally defective people to purify the German race of bad genes. And that was already happening in America anyway. The next step was to actually kill mentally defective children But even this was done at first with only very disabled children. And it was done by just sedating them a little too much. It didn't seem quite like killing. Particular children were restless. One of the nurses was instructed to put luminol in their food to sedate them and help them sleep. This seemed reasonable. It stopped them from screaming. And then putting in enough sedatives so they wouldn't wake up didn't seem so different. It wasn't quite killing. And the step after that was to gather impaired adults, mostly from mental hospitals, and to take them to centers equipped with carbon monoxide gas so they could be put out of their misery. And later on, when Jews and others were sent to concentration camps, it seemed a logical step to kill any of them who were mentally impaired or physically impaired. To put them out of their misery seemed more humane than making them drop dead of hunger or labor or illness. And once they were used to doing that, it was really not so difficult just to exterminate all of them, healthy or not. They did have a problem at first, though. The people who had to kill the Jews were disturbed by it, especially shooting women and children week after week. Not disturbed enough to stop, mind you, but disturbed enough to start having nightmares and sleepless nights and to drink excessively. So the authorities experimented with traveling vans that had carbon monoxide piped into the trucks. Then all you had to do was load people into the vans. You didn't kill them, the van did. And the same was true with the gas chambers. They made it almost impossible to feel, they made it feel almost possible that you weren't actually killing anyone personally. You were one step removed, step by step. Now, in the concentration camps, someone had to make the decision as to who would live to work in the camp and who was too unhealthy to be useful. Usually when they came off the train, there was someone who would make a decision. Making the selections like that, knowing these people in this line are going to die and these people are going to work, that took some getting used to. As one Nazi doctor explained in an interview, when you see a selection for the first time, I'm not talking about myself, I'm talking about even the most hardened SS people. You see how women and children are selected. And then you are so shocked, and that just cannot be described. And after a few weeks, one can become accustomed to it. And that change cannot be explained to anybody, but I think it can give you an impression of it. When you've gone into a slaughterhouse where animals are being slaughtered, a steak will probably not taste good to us afterward. But when you do that every day for 2 weeks, then your steak again tastes as good as before. One doctor who refused to do selections explained that he was just psychologically unable to. He said, I observed it and could stand it for only half an hour, and then I had to vomit. To which his colleague replied, that will pass. It happens to everyone. Don't make such a fuss over it. For you see, most were able to do it without making a fuss, because we human beings can get used to almost anything if we're given enough time, and if we're brought there in steps. There's an interesting book by Madeleine Albright, U.S. Secretary of State from 1997 to 2001, and also U.S. Ambassador to the United Nations. And it's called Fascism, a Warning. And it gives a sense of this gradualism from the point of view of a German citizen who reflected on the rise of the Third Reich after the war was over. This is what this person said. To live in this process is absolutely not to be able to notice it. Please try to believe me. Each step was so small, so inconsequential, so well explained, or on occasion regretted, that unless one were detached from the whole process from the beginning, unless one understood that all these little measures that no patriotic German could resent must someday lead to, one no more saw it developing from day to day than a farmer in his field sees the corn growing. And one day, too late, your principles, if you were ever sensible to them, all rush in on you. And he goes on. The burden of self-deception has grown too heavy. In some minor incident, in my case, my little boy, hardly more than a baby, saying Jew, swine, collapses it all at once. And you see that everything has changed, and changed completely, right under your nose. Now the reason I'm telling you this is not just to depress you, it's twofold. I want us to understand that the power of gradualness, it's something we need to understand its power so that we never mistakenly believe that we could never do what the Nazis did or that the Holocaust could never happen again. It is not so far removed from you and me, or rather, it's not so far removed that people like you and me couldn't reach it, and countries like yours and mine couldn't reach it if we kept taking steps in that direction. But more importantly, I don't want us to ever mistakenly believe that we are too far removed from people like Jesus, or Buddha, or Claire Barton, or Gandhi, to do the kinds of things they have done for the good of the world. We are not so far removed from them, or from many other moral heroes we may have. The kind of loving, enlightened, divine human being that you would like to be is only steps away from where you are now. You can gradually become that person. Gradually works both ways, of course. For example, during World War II, in the village of Larsen in France, the people took in Jews and hid them during the Nazi occupation. But it was a very gradual thing. They just started taking Jewish refugees in before they knew it was dangerous to do that. And when they realized it was dangerous, they went the next step of protecting the Jews anyway. They started resisting the Nazis in small degrees, as Magna Trope, one of the chief rescuers, explained. We started to disobey in very little ways. For example, in our school, it was suggested that we put a picture of Marshal Petain on the wall. We decided not to do it. It was a small disobedience. Then we started to be more disobedient. In the mornings, to give another example, the flag had to be put up in the front of the school and the children were supposed to salute it. We decided not to do it. More and more we would disobey. We had a habit of doing it. One day, finally, the governor came and said to my husband, "Now you must give me the names of all the Jews that are here." It was at this time that the Jews had to put on the sign, the yellow star. And my husband said, "No, I can't. These Jews, they are my brothers." Jotje Vos, who was one of the people who saved dozens of Jews in Holland, described it this way. You started off storing a suitcase for a friend, and before you knew it, you were in over your head. You see, we can change the world step by step, and we can change our lives in degrees. And I can't presume to tell you what steps you should be taking to become the kind of person you're meant to be. And it could be as simple as giving a little more money to charity this year than you did last time, and maybe more the next, and so on. Or you may decide to spend more quality time with your children or grandchildren. Or you may decide to work on your relationship with your partner. You may decide to go on more marches for social justice, or write more letters on social issues, or volunteer a few hours a week, or decide to do three good deeds a day from now on. But whatever it is, decide now to take that step. There's a Chinese proverb that you heard earlier from the Tao Te Ching. It's the one that goes, "A journey of 1,000 li begins with the first step." It can be a small one. But once you've got used to the small one, try adding in another step, and then another, and keep going. By grace, by gradus. You don't have to be degraded. Let yourself be upgraded. Or as the Reverend Gordon McKeeman once put it, you feel like a drop in the bucket? Who asked you to fill the bucket? Especially all alone. Persistence demands on patience and keeping at it when there's little to reassure us. It would be too bad to give up, to sit back, bemoan the sorry state of the world, and wonder why somebody, anybody, everybody but not me, thank you, doesn't do something about it. After all, he said, the Grand Canyon was fashioned by drops of water, as ordinary as they seem. As another minister put it, and I'll close with this, this is the Reverend Laurel Hallman. I sat in the restaurant by the window, eating my lunch and watching the construction project across the street. A cavernous hole had been dug to provide the foundation for a high-rise building. In the middle of the hole, a man on a single bulldozer was moving the mountain of dirt accumulated from the deep excavation. He started at the bottom, slowly pushing one scoopful up and over the top. Then he backed down and pushed another scoopful up, barely changing the outline of the dirt as he worked. That's wrong, I thought. Surely there's a better way. But as I thought of alternatives, I couldn't find one. In the hour and a half that I sat there, he did slowly move the mountain of dirt, one scoop at a time, one trip at a time. I was reminded of the Christian scriptures which refer to a faith so as to remove mountains. An extraordinary faith, I had always thought, powerful, even fierce. And yet, as I watched as the man on the bulldozer moved his mountain of dirt, I realized that such a faith is more patient than powerful. It does the task at hand deliberately, consistently, with tenacity as well as vision. I admired that man. I wondered if he was religious, and what was at the source of his patience. I wondered if he knew how extraordinary his task seemed from across the street. I wondered if he knew how much his life gave witness to the truth that faith which can move mountains is lived daily, in small portions, in the midst of our lives, moving the mountain one small step at a time. Now at this time of the offering, I invite you to think about the things we are grateful for as we pass the collection plate and sing.